So, Bill, it's great to be with you again. And I think today we want to talk about some topics that are very near and dear to both our hearts. Frankly, anything from a selling perspective, but specifically, as we've evolved in sales, it's always been about the resources that are at our disposal and how can we leverage them to meaningfully connect. And so I know both of us have had some experience in what is called social selling, but I think we also have the perspective that social is not all about, it's not the end all be all. It's not the only tool in the tool set. So we'd love to get your perspective, not only on social, but how do we keep it authentic?
Well, thanks so much, Carson, for having me. And yes, this is near and dear to my heart. I'm from New York, so I'm going to talk fast. Some of your folks may need to put this on half speed to understand me. But yeah, I believe in being authentic salespeople and authentic social sellers. I think it transforms into everything that we do. I'm a big proponent of the folks from Selling from the Heart, Larry Levine, Daryl Amy, and what they're doing. Great folks. And they had someone on their podcast back in April, Erin Hazakostas, who wrote a book called You Do You-ish, which is all about also being authentic. And what she brought to the table was the Greek definition of authentic, which is authentikos, which actually means to be genuine and to be the real you. And so I think that has to happen on social. But here's my thing, we have to realize in being social sellers and authentic social sellers is that all selling is social. We tend to kind of separate it out and we say, okay, we're going to do this thing on social. We're going to do this thing in person. We're maybe going to do this thing on the phone. But really, when it all comes down to it, all selling is social selling. And I think where we confuse it is we confuse social selling and social media marketing. And we think if we just have the best LinkedIn profile, we have just the best website, people are going to find it and they're going to beat a path to our doors. And that's just not the case. You can't create a perfect thing that's just going to pull everybody in. Social is just one piece of the puzzle. It's one medium. It's, as I like to say, it's just one club in your golf bag. For the golfers that are out there, you're allowed 14 clubs when you go out on the course. And that's if you're in a tournament. And you're never going to use just one club. You're never going to use your putter in the tee box, right? That's never going to happen. The only time you do that is if you're playing putt-putt golf, right? You're also never going to use your driver on the green. That's just not going to happen. There's the right time and the right place for each tool. So what does that mean? That means that sometimes we're going to meet clients in person and we're going to have a selling experience with them, a social experience with them there in person. Another time it's going to be better just to shoot a text off to someone. Another time it's an email, and another time it's, oh my God, there's this thing called the phone. And we can actually pick it up and we can actually talk to people. And a lot of folks that are proponents of social selling, they're afraid to talk about the phone. But I'm not, because I see it as just one piece of the puzzle, one club in the bag among all of them. That's really my theory about that.
Bill, I love that you said that element about it being really authentic and genuine. And I've talked frequently about how, first off, I was doing social as well back when it was kind of an anomaly for some. I didn't have the results necessarily also to back it up because it was just, to your point, it was another tool. I grew up in kind of a one-call close, cold calling environment. So I was very familiar with and comfortable with the phone. And so, but when knowledge and information are key components to effective selling. And so the ability to do research about a customer, their organization, some of the industry trends, all of these things that you can do via social are so impactful and powerful. And so, I love too that you highlighted people like Larry Levine. I'm a big fan too of Mike Weinberg, and I know that like one of his philosophies specifically is around, look, social is great, but it is one component, one element. It helps you be more effective and you use it the right way in order to unlock doors and get the meetings that you wouldn't have gotten otherwise. Fantastic. Social is always a great way way to stay top of mind. So you don't necessarily have to always be calling or emailing. You can make social posts, and people that you're connected with can see those. Perhaps you see something that's timely from a topic perspective, or reminds you of a conversation that you recently had with that client, and you just take 15 seconds out of your day and you send them the link that you find on social. Things like that are really impactful, and they're quality investments in the relationship. All selling is social. In fact, I made a comment, I think it was last year, on one of these. Social selling is just selling. It's leveraging all the resources at your disposal in order to effectively create, nurture, and build relationships over time, to stay top of mind, but to also ensure that you are at the pulse of what's important to these organizations and these people. Now, you highlighted the clubs, right? And I love sports analogies when it comes to sales, also because a lot of the great athletes pride themselves in being students of the game. I like to consider myself a student of the game because there's so much to understand from a parameter perspective, from a resource perspective, and that's how you can be most effective. But you alluded to the clubs, Bill. What are the other clubs that are in your bag? What do you think are the most important tools and resources that you bring to an authentic selling platform?
Well, I think it starts with you as a person, right? So golf clubs are just that. They're just clubs. They just sit there. They don't hit the ball themselves, right? It takes a player, and you alluded to the athlete analogy, and that's so great because athletes don't just go to one practice a week and then they're ready for the game. Tiger Woods, well, he doesn't do that anymore, but Phil Mickelson doesn't just go and practice one day before a tournament. He's out there practicing every day. I think I read Tiger Woods' training schedule, and I was like, my God, the guy plays golf he plays like 27 holes a day, day after day after day. Why? Because he wants to be good at what he does, right? He wants to practice his craft. And it's the same thing. The biggest tool that we have is us. And that's kind of my second point about being an authentic social seller, is being authentically you. Okay. Authenticity or genuineness can be your superpower. And Larry Levine in Selling from the Heart, it's on page 26, and I know it because it's underlined, and I say it over and over again. If you're being your authentic self, there is no competition. So in other words, if you're genuinely being you, then no one can compete with you because there's no one like you. But here's the thing. What's hard about that is we have to be in touch with ourselves. We have to know ourselves. We have to be able to answer some questions. And there's some sales leaders in that are listening right now that are going, oh, he's getting that touchy-feely stuff. Yeah, that touchy-feely stuff is very important because as people, as sales professionals, we have to know who we are and what we stand for. So we have to ask ourselves some questions. Why am I doing what I'm doing? What are some of my personal values? Some of my personal values are authenticity, genuineness, adding value, serving, having hope, and having compassion. Those are my personal values, but you're going to have different ones. And the folks that are listening, they're going to have different ones. They need to know what those are. And how do you express them and how do you live them out, especially when it comes to, first and foremost, your family, right? So you want to live your values out with your family, those closest to you. But then in a work environment, how do you work those values out with your clients? How do you serve them? How do you live those values out with your prospects? How do you live those values out with your coworkers? And here's a big one, Carson. How do you live those values out with your competition? Are you constantly undermining or undercutting? I'm very fortunate that in the social sales training world and even in the sales training world, it's a very collaborative community. And so I'm fortunate that, but there are some industries that aren't. But your personal values have to reflect even that area. Scott Schilling on one podcast I heard him, he said, we need to come into every relationship with high intention, but low attachment. So high intention of, Carson, what can I do for you? How can I serve you without attaching any expectation to what you're going to do for me? And that's really a big thing. So I think, forget about the clubs in the bag. Let's talk about the player that's going to use those clubs, and how are we as sales professionals working on the soft skills, working on the heart of the matter, working on our brains. What books are we reading? What podcasts are we listening to? And how are we honing our craft? I'm always looking for the next book that I can read that's going to help me, maybe not so much close a sale, but it's going to help me get my mind right so that I'm looking at things the right way. I just purchased your book, and so I'm excited to read that and see how am I going to use what you have gone through, because you're a social sales pioneer. So I want to follow you. The landmines, right? What's the best way to walk through a minefield? Follow someone who's been through it. And so that's what I want to do. So I would encourage everyone, to get your book. I would encourage them to read Selling from the Heart by Larry Levine. You Do You-ish by Aaron Hazakassis is a hilarious book, but it talks so well about authenticity. And she talks about it in terms of looking for a new job or starting a new career. But let's face it, that can all be translated into sales. So to long-winded answer of your question, let's forget about the clubs in the bag for now. Let's talk about the player and how the player, the sales professional, can be ready for whatever situation comes out by really practicing and honing our craft and our skill.
Spectacular answer, Bill. And it does. It starts with the player, because it starts with, what are your motivations? What are your passions? What are your superpowers? You need to be in touch with those things, while at the same time being able to identify your own areas of opportunity or things that you want to improve. Where are your gaps? I find it phenomenal, specifically as a seller and sales leader, to attach myself to the people that are better than I am at components that I want to improve on. How can I learn? How can I replicate? How can I learn their best practices so that I can assimilate that into my way of doing things? Sales is a people and process game. It's that simple. If you've got the right people doing the right process, you're guaranteed success. However, sometimes things change, the variables change, and that's why it's so important that we have to stay at the pulse of what's going on in our organization, with people that we touch in the sales food chain, and with our clients, of course. It is a relationships and resources game. And so we've got to focus on, do we have the right relationships within the organization, and also with colleagues, with the people that we work with the people that are on our teams, things of that nature, with our leadership. We've got to make sure we're attuned to all of those things, and we've got to make sure we have all the right resources. Now, I love that you pointed out that element too, Bill, about the value that we bring right out of the gate, because I think this is where a lot of sellers stumble, is we attempt to make a connection, and then we regurgitate everything that our company offers in hopes that something will attract this person to want to talk to us. But it's the exact opposite approach of what you want to take. Now, I'm interested in your thoughts on this too, because I think for the process is really the element that I want to dive in on for sellers that are watching today. It's really critical. I've noticed over time that a lot of times customers, they hear very similar messages from a lot of different vendors that have similar products, or even maybe they don't have similar products, but they're trying to stand out in the ecosystem. But they take the same approach in trying to get the conversation. And so by default, the buyer has a process. Typically, we are inserted into the process down the road a ways. I read that 56, 57% of the buying process is already complete sometimes by the time a vendor is attached. So it's so important that we attune very quickly to potential needs, but that we can make a connection. And I think that not only happens through authenticity, as you've discussed, but also transparency. Show them behind the curtain, what is the value that I can deliver right out of the gate with no necessary guarantee of return. I need to make an investment in that relationship right out of the gate. So my thoughts, Bill, I'm curious, your vantage point, how do you coach people on that initial outreach and those early steps? How do we develop the relationship? What gives us the best probability of success in those early steps?
Well, I'm glad you said that, because as soon as you said process, I thought of the third bit of being an authentic social seller is connecting authentically. And yes, a large percent of the buying process has, the research has been done when our clients are somehow coming in contact with us. And what happens is, as you mentioned, they have a buying process, and we come in and we try to take over that with our sales process, which is all about us. And, corporate vision tells us that 74% of B2B buyers will go with the sales rep that was the first to add value and insight. Not the first that had the cheapest price, not the one that had the best pitch deck, not the one that could give them tickets to the Yankees games, but the one that was the first to share insight and value. And that's where we come from. We come from a place of connecting with people authentically. Now, we're LinkedIn trainers. So when we're training B2B sales teams, we're teaching them how to connect with people on LinkedIn. What we saw about a year ago was right before the pandemic really kicked in and things really shut down. What we were seeing was a lot of connection requests on LinkedIn with no personal message. And if you accepted that connection request, you got an automated message back with a pitch of their product and service. Okay. Then about 2 months into the pandemic, I'd say probably May, June, what we saw was what's rampant right now was people just pitching right away in a connection request. They've not earned the right to have a conversation. Heck, they haven't even qualified me, but yet they're reaching out to connect with me, probably based on automation, which is against LinkedIn's terms of use, probably based on some type of search they've done on me and they mistargeted me. So quick aside, I was in the pest control industry. Well, right when my youngest daughter was just born, and she's going to be 29 next week. So this was a while ago. I still get connection requests about how they can help me with my pest control business. You know, so that kind of thing really hurts us, and we have to stop that. We have to connect with authenticity. And, you know, when I say just stop the spam, there are no shortcuts in using social in your sales process, using that club. There is no shortcuts. And we need to realize that this isn't cold calling and it's not mass email marketing. See, what happened was those processes worked in the day, and they still do work for some people. So back in the 70s and 80s and into the 90s, cold calling was rampant. You know, if in the 80s and 90s, if you were a kid at home and the phone rang at dinner time, 95% of the time it was somebody calling to sell you something, right? And that worked then, and it may even work now. But here's the thing, Carson, if you cold call me and I hang up on you, I see a phone number. That's all I see. It doesn't register in my mind. I move on. Then email marketing came in, and that got to be the big thing. And we all have email inboxes that are filled with pitches that come every single day. So if you email me a pitch, I'm going to look at it. I may see your name, I may see your company, but it doesn't register. I click delete. I'm moving on. Here's the problem on LinkedIn. People are cold calling basically on LinkedIn, and they're pitching, and they're doing so. And I'm seeing your face, I'm seeing your name, I'm seeing your company, and it's much more personal because it's much more visual. And so what we're teaching our clients is this: come in with value, look at someone's profile, and just because they're a client of yours, that doesn't mean that allows you to connect with them. You still need to find relevance. What I say is you still need to find context to connect with them authentically. You know, look through their profile. And listen, if you can't come up with a context, don't connect with them. Follow them, look at their activity, engage with their content. If you do that, they'll want to connect with you. And then from there, you need to provide value and insight. You can't pitch. You have to find not so much what you want to say, but what they want to hear. And so another piece of it is social listening, and making sure you know who your ideal clients are and what are their topics that not only they care about, but the industries that they sell into care about. And that's the content that you want to feed them. That's the value that you want to feed them. You know, our definition of social selling is building relationships, being a resource, and providing real value, and understanding that the sales will come when the time is right. What we need to do is slow down the outreach to speed up the outcome. See, because when we're doing this mass outreach on LinkedIn, which by the way is going to continue to not work because LinkedIn has cut down the amount of a connection request you can send a week to 100. That's it, which I love that. But if you're doing mass outreach on LinkedIn, let's say you send 100 connection requests and 10 people accept them. So you're like, wow, like 10%, that's a pretty good return in most cold scenarios. But here's the problem. Out of those 10, you have 90 more, and you don't know the damage you did to your reputation and your company's reputation with them. So what I'm saying is, if you slow it down and you connect with 10 people authentically, and if that leads to 3 sales conversations that could convert, the thing is those other 7, you haven't burned those bridges. We're continuing to have clients come back to us a year later, say, hey, we talked to you last year, we weren't ready, we're ready now. Why? Because by sharing that resource, those resources and that education, we built credibility. We're the go-to people now for social sales training. So when the time is right, they're ready. We didn't burn that bridge. So, really what we have to do, as I said, we have to slow down the outreach to speed up the outcome. I just did a poll on LinkedIn. It just ended, and I had 107 votes on it. And I asked, what are the areas you deem most important to your sales training efforts for the remainder of 2021? And number 1 was prospecting. 54% of the respondents said prospecting was the most important thing. And because it's so important, sales leaders are out there saying, just use LinkedIn, just go. But we've got to slow it down so that we can connect authentically. Larry Levine talks about not being an empty suit. Well, on LinkedIn, we can't be an empty profile, right? We've got to provide value in our profile, but then we have to back that up with providing value at every turn, not selling, not pitching, but just being a help. Stop telling people how you help them and just simply help them.
Magical, Bill. Sellers often say that contactability is one of the biggest issues they face. And frankly, as a sales leader, when you start looking into deals, or even just in my history of getting deals done, one of the biggest gotcha moments is when you're trying to get a deal closer to the finish line. Look up and you realize, do I have the relationships that I need to get this deal done? And often we don't. And frankly, that's the gotcha or the aha. We are trying to sell to or arm somebody in an organization that is ultimately going to have to sell this up the chain. Right. And we're asking them to do our job for us. And that's where this deal falls apart, because they don't have the same conviction that we have. They don't have the same things on the line. Frankly, if they get pushback or challenged, they're not going to stake their reputation on what we're trying to sell. That's not their job. So that's why we need those key influencer relationships. And you're right, pipeline, prospecting, these are always things that are so top of mind for organizations. But the methodology by which we approach or we use in order to drive up pipeline is not often sound as sellers, and that's the problem. Now, you said this about authenticity, and why I love that that's the theme of our conversation today. Authenticity is just humanizing the process, because look, sales is a probability game. I'll use another sports analogy. A lot of these things are about at bats, right? The more often we get in front of the client, if our pitch is sound, we will get conversations, or we'll get invited back to the next step of the sales process, and that's the key element. Now, I love also that you highlighted the fact that we can't just skip to the pitch. We've got to make sure we get the conversation first. The conversation has to happen under the context of what's interesting to this customer. And if we go in just trying to talk about what's about ourselves, we're not going to get in the door. We've got to make sure that we have some kind of knowledge or insight about their industry, or have a sales story to share about what we're actually doing with clients of their ilk, or we talk about something that we know specifically about this organization, a change, a reorganization, a merger and acquisition, a new executive, whatever it is, leveraging that intel in order to create an interesting dialogue. And I think that's where we fail. Now, again, I want to focus and double down on this probability element. You talked about the calls that we used to get when we were sitting around as kids, and the call came in to our house during dinner time. What was the probability that call was going to receive some type of warm reception? It was probably low. I remember how my dad used to answer those calls, right?
Yeah, I was going to say, in my house, it was 0. There's no probability.
Yeah, 0, right? And I always tell my sellers, like, okay, think about this. Think about the 1,000 other people that are calling on this exact same prospect. What are you going to do in order to stand apart from those other 1,000 or those other 999? What's going to give you a leg up? We can control very few things, but we can control quality of our outreach. We can control quantity of outreach, and we can control the consistency by which we execute the process. And all of these things are critical components. I grew up in a call center, like I said. I remember our leadership. Oh, it's total number of dials. I need you calling 100 calls a day or 500 calls a day or whatever it was. Thing is, okay, I get it. On paper, if I call 500 people, I'm bound to have a conversation. But if I completely drop the ball in my delivery, that conversation is not going to go well. So it's not about 500 calls or 100 calls. I had a rep who made 10 calls a day, but they were amazing. They were immaculate, and she sold more than anybody else in my department. So the key element that I want to focus on is you control these variables, these tangible elements like the quality of your delivery. That enhances your probability of success. Like you were talking about, you said 100 LinkedIn connection requests. You get 10% back. You may think that's great, but I get close to 50%. And the reason why is because I use exactly what you outlined. I focus on a key element of why I should be connecting, and I allude to the immediate value that I believe that I can bring them. The other element too, Bill, is even if I got 10% back, and I think that's great, what percentage of those are actually going to meet with me when I send a follow-up?
Right.
Relatively small. And so that's the key element that I think we have to focus on. Probability is key. You want to up your batting average, but the key thing is you've got to do it in the right way. You've got to do it from a place of authenticity. And I understand, like sometimes it's like flexing an uncomfortable muscle. I've seen a lot of people try a new approach and they've maybe failed, but I don't view it as failure, because even if you go out, like if my success rate in getting an executive to talk to me was like 1 in 10 before, and let's say I go out and I strike out 5 times in a row, that doesn't mean the process doesn't work. That doesn't mean I should go back to comfortable ways of mediocrity or comfortable ways of failing. So I guess my question to you, Bill, would be, based on everything that we've discussed today and about really enhancing the probability of success, setting a foundation for success, connecting with people meaningfully, how do you teach people over the long haul? Because there's one element, you alluded to this earlier, there's one element of people realizing the value of this up front, but how do you coach people consistently over time to develop this into a process, develop it into a muscle that works well and a fine-oiled machine?
Well, so we teach basically 5 pillars in social selling. And remember, we're LinkedIn trainers, so we're talking about doing this on LinkedIn. And it starts with your profile. All roads lead back to your profile. Your profile doesn't need to be about you. And LinkedIn kind of defaults to that because it started out as a recruiting site, but it's not about you. It's not about all the awards that you've won. No one cares about that. It needs to be about your ideal client. You've got to transform it from a resume to a resource. When people land on it, they need to resonate. Your ideal clients, they need to resonate. You need to create curiosity even in your profile. Teach them something new. What I call is you want lean in moments there. So your profile is the first one. The second one, I talked about socially listening, and you listen with your eyes also, right? So what is it that your ideal clients care about? What do their industries care about? For a while, I was writing a lot of content about automation because I don't like automation. Guess what? My clients could care less about automation. They don't know what it is. And so that wasn't resonating with everyone. So I had to change it. So finding out social listening is the second thing. What is it that your clients care about? What problems are they helping solve that they care about? Because that's what you want to share with them. The third thing is content. You need to curate, create, and engage on content. This is the long game of LinkedIn. It takes a long time to create content and get it to create any kind of inbound. However, if you curate and create content that's of quality, that's of value, that shares those and answers those questions that your ideal clients are looking for, you can strategically not just put that in the news feed, but actually share that in the inbox on LinkedIn of your ideal clients. Ask for their point of view. I talked about the poll that I did. I actually put that in about 85 people's inboxes. That's how I got that many votes. It had 4,000 views, but many people didn't want to vote. Consequently, I sent about 25 in-mails out and not one of them replied. In-mail is really taking a hit. Before the pandemic, response rate was about 22%. LinkedIn saying now it's less than 7%. So that's just an aside. But so that's the third pillar of creating, curating, and engaging with content. The fourth one is nurturing your existing connection. I guarantee that the people watching this and listening to this, if they were to go look through their first degree connections, they're already connected to some of their ideal clients and they completely forgot about them. Why? Because we connect and forget. we connect with people and we completely forget. So if they want to reach out to me, I can show them how. Many people don't know, you can actually export your first degree connections into an Excel spreadsheet. So if folks reach out to me, I'd be happy to help with that. So that's the fourth thing, nurturing your existing connection. The fifth one is the real magic of LinkedIn, and that's warm market prospecting. You have the ability to search your connections. All right. So I can look, who does Carson Heady know that I want to know that are my ideal clients, that I can then reach out to Carson and say, hey, Carson, you know these 10 people that I'm trying to get in front of. Can I run these names by you? And then we talk about that. And that either gives me an opportunity that you're going to introduce me, or I can get permission just to mention the person that we were talking and their name came up and you suggested we talk. That's the real magic of LinkedIn. And if you do this on a consistent basis, you will be successful with LinkedIn and with social selling. I love Atomic Habits by James Clear. There was one sentence that rocked my world. He said, we don't rise to the level of our goals, we fall to the level of our systems. So just like you need a prospecting system, you need a social selling system, a LinkedIn system. And we can help with that. We have free resources. If they go to socialsaleslink.com/library, they can sign up for a free membership to our content library, where we have tons of systems that are in place there that people can look at, and resources that will help them in their journey on social selling.
So the last question that I want to make sure we hit on is, what do you tell the person who says, I don't need social? I've got all the relationships I need at this account. I've been doing this for years. I've had this account for years. I don't need this stuff. What do you tell them?
I tell them that about 20% of people in any organization change year to year. And so that person that they're so greatly connected with, there's a good chance that they're not going to be there sometime in the future. And you talked before about making sure you're connected, and the amount of people it's taking now to get a deal done. We're just seeing that elongated. We're seeing where it was maybe 7 or 8 a year ago, that it's now up to somewhere between 12 and 18. So that one person that they're maybe not as key as you think they are. What social can help you do is socially surround an account to make sure you're connected with that many more people. And I would just say to that person, how did April, May, and June of 2020, how did that work for you? Because a lot of people had that attitude last year, and suddenly they found out they couldn't go meet with that person. They couldn't take them out to lunch. They might be able to get them on the phone, but they were busy with other things. So really, do what works for you. This is what I tell all of my clients. Whatever's working, if cold calling is working for you, do that. That's how you're successful. Don't change just because some talking head says you should do it. However, be open to new ideas and to new technologies, because Carson, the technology is only growing. I was in a networking meeting a year ago, and they said, so what are you thankful for during COVID? And I said, technology, because without this, we just wouldn't have been able to do business. So, I get it. I get that what's worked for you has worked for you, and thank God it has. But what happens if the world changes tomorrow? Because we saw a year ago that it happened. Within 2 weeks, the Outbound Conference has just been this week, and Bryn and I were fortunate enough that we brought a virtual session on LinkedIn and social selling. We were pleased to do that, but we were supposed to be there last year, and that's when I knew that COVID was kind of a real big deal, because suddenly this big conference that we were supposed to go to got canceled pretty much like that. Within 3 days, it went from we may move it to we're not sure what's happening to nope, it's canceled, everything's shutting down. And I think that caught a lot of people off guard. I know it caught me off guard. And so you really have to be open to new ways of doing things, because you just never know, what's going to happen. I think that's what 2020 taught us, is that we can't predict the future. Even with all this technology, we don't know what tomorrow's going to bring.
I think you're spot on, Bill. I think any great professional, I mean, look at even a doctor, if you don't learn a new procedure, a new way of doing things, it's going to be impossible to stay at the cutting edge of what's transpiring in that industry.
Mhm.
And things will pass you up, pass you by. I think you got to think about the big picture component of this. I love the line from Wall Street, not that I condone anything else that Gordon Gekko says, but the most value commodity I know of is information, is what he says. Social gives you all of this information at your fingertips. You can see what matters to your client. You can see what matters to their organization. You can be at the pulse of M&A activity, new executives that are being named. And I've used these as actionable insights for years. But I think there's two big components that I break it down for personally. One element has been my personal results. On paper, there's no reason that I should have. I'm just a small town Midwest US kid who has worked for a couple of large companies and some small companies in my career. And I've used these tools and these resources to create relationships, open the door, but then do the very things that we've talked about the whole thing. It's all about transparency, building a foundation of trust, and making sure that they understand the resources and the value that can be brought. And the other element too is even from a personal branding perspective. It was years ago. I mentioned I was doing social when it was an anomaly. Nobody knew what it was, and I didn't have the results to back it up yet. But as I started to accrue millions worth of dollars of deals that would not have existed without social tools, then there was notice that started to be taken. I got a lot of opportunities to be able to speak and to present and coach and train on social and prospecting. And I run into people still a lot that, I've had this account forever and I don't need this. Well, guess what? These accounts are on loan. We don't own them, and they may change hands. Somebody else may take them on. Let's say you go into a new territory. How are you going to best give yourself a probability of success of creating new relationships, staying top of mind? The last thing I would say on that personal brand component, and I love that you highlighted that about LinkedIn, personal brand has been very valuable to me. I became known globally at Microsoft, a very large company for social selling and for social engagement. And that transformed my career. And so I would challenge anybody that thinks that they don't need to understand social, know social, use social. Think about any relationship that you would need to know. Almost every meaningful role in my entire career that I've ever been pulled into has been because of a relationship. And those relationships are created a variety of ways. But your personal brand is your calling card, and that is going to follow you. What are you wanting to be known for? What's your superpower? How can you leverage that? And how can you leverage that in a game-changing way? And so, I don't purport to know everything about social. In fact, I'm always learning. I got called out a year ago by a gentleman who actually was noticing the fact that I had gotten lazy. I started posting a lot of third-party articles, and he was right. I changed my approach, and I started doing a lot more of my own content and not necessarily worrying about the time I was posting or how often or the frequency. I was focusing more on the quality and actually being social. So I just encourage anybody that's out there that thinks that they don't need social, think about the ramifications that it can have for your brand, how it can transform who you are and the perception of who you are, because that can really be something that takes you places that you may not even be able to imagine today.
Yeah, and I would just close with saying it's not going anywhere. I mean, the growth that LinkedIn has seen in the time that I've been training, doing LinkedIn training, is somewhere around 250 million users that have been added to it. And so, and your company just made just a small investment in LinkedIn, $26 billion. So it's not going anywhere. And, our Carson, our competition isn't the other guy. It's not the other company. Our competition is status quo. And if we're not willing to change, we're the status quo, and we end up competing against ourselves. And here's the thing, some other person, it may be a young person, it may be a gray-haired guy like me, is going to come along and start leveraging LinkedIn and start forming relationships within that company that somebody has that aren't using social. And suddenly there's going to be a change and they're going to be locked out. And so, I agree with you. We need to embrace these technologies because we just don't know what tomorrow's going to bring.
Well said. Yeah, this was great. Anything else you want to try to hit on in the last minute or so?
No, I would just encourage folks to connect with me on LinkedIn. Please send me a personal note telling me that you saw me here with Carson, and visit us at socialsaleslink.com. There's tons of resources there. And, we just love to help people and help them leverage social so that they can start more conversations.
Love it. Bill, thanks so much. Really appreciate it.